Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast, where we talk to customers and experts about how to create products and services that feel like time well spent. And now, here are your hosts, experienced strategists, Dave Norton and Aranza Savas.
Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast. I'm Aranza Savas.
And I'm Dave Norton.
And today we are joined by Corinne Murray. Corinne has worked at companies like WeWork, Amex, RXR, Gensler, and CBRE. These are big companies with big investments in workplace. Corinne has been in the midst of some big, important decisions that have impacted the way those teams work. And she has developed over the course of her career a deep specialty in designing innovative, people-centered approaches for companies, for both their company brand and their company culture. She looks at workplace strategy and how experience can be used to consider both the needs of the businesses and the employees and ultimately the customers. We're so excited to have her here today to talk to us about the latest thinking with regard to employee time, with employee experience and how we bring meaning to that, and how the move towards a hybrid and in many cases fully remote workforce has influenced the latest thinking around employee engagement. Corinne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you both.
And I know you just started your own company, so talk to us a little bit about Agate and why you started it now.
Yeah. I started my own company, Agate, back in April. And the idea really was, well, first, it was something I had started thinking about around 2019. And I kind of just pushed it down. I wasn't quite ready. I wasn't quite sure what my message was going to be. And over the course of the pandemic, you really started to see how work and place continued to get fractured more and more. And the way that the current industries that support the environments that people get their work done in really are driven by space first and foremost. And it doesn't quite fit in the HR bucket. So there's this negative space that is that intersection between the people and like the HR policies and the built environment. And that's really where I like living and like existing. And there are a lot of people like me that are sort of edge cases in both the HR world and the real estate and workplace world that find ourselves here. And that's really why I brought Agate into the world, is because there aren't any true organizations that focus specifically on that. And for me, it was really important to develop my own thinking and develop my own brand around this because, as you said, I've been around the block in the real estate world and in the experience world. And so it really just felt like the right moment. And I just needed a little bit of a push, and this was the one that I got.
Mm-hmm. What are the big changes you see driving the shift in employee expectations?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it does pin back to just the start of the pandemic, because we all, whether we liked it or not, learned how to be distributed teams. And Anne Helen Peterson and her book about, working apart, I forget the title, but they basically were saying it was the worst way to learn hybrid because it was under duress. It wasn't planned. We didn't have anything set up, but the muscle was built regardless. And so regardless of how we got there, people now are seeing, having a more distributed or having a more hybrid experience is giving me all these different things that, from 5 a.m. in the morning on Monday mornings until about 7 at night on a Friday, they didn't have access to. And so that rebalancing or that sort of renegotiation of where time is spent really started to happen in March of 2020. And it's just going to be hard to unwind that because, the theory is you can set a habit in about 6 months. And we've done that over the course of 3 years. So we've built a lot of habits on top of one another. So it's a big castle to take down.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've seen a whole new view of our lives, which is what I think you're pointing toward. We had this very narrow perspective about how work and life were supposed to operate side by side. And we'd sort of chaptered them, right? You go to this setting, and we know, certainly through all the experience research and the habit research that I've done over the years, we see that environment plays a massive factor in people's well-being and their behaviors in different settings. And so we had these workplace habits and this workplace life, and we had a community, and we had things we ate, and we went to the salad place, and there were all these things that were associated with that mode, to use our language.
Right.
And now we've taken all of work mode and we've mushed it in with home mode.
Right. Right.
And all those behaviors and spaces are now just one big human soup, which I assume has made us better in some ways and much worse in others.
Right. And it's the worst right now because we don't have any sort of standards aren't the right word, but we don't have any sort of like bumpers on a bowling lane that help sort of guide us together. So everyone has their own version of soup. And we need to start, we're now 3 years into this, pandemic pains aside, a very cataclysmic change to the function of work and the function of just like, how do you spend the 7 days of your week? And everyone's going to have a different way of going about it, different components. And we need to start figuring out what's the universal kit of parts. What are the things that make sense for everyone? It's sort of like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it's, I don't know, Corinne's hierarchy of work, maybe. What are the components that every single organization needs, every single team needs? Because the independent, I'm working remotely, there's too much entropy. And I think that's what organizations are struggling with the most, is that everyone's interpretation of remote or hybrid is very, very different in their own personal lives. And we don't have enough of a rubric to say, this is the foundation. And then we can sort of self-select from within that.
Hey, Corinne, before I'm very interested to hear from you about things that you've found that work to create those bumper guards. But before we go there, I don't know if you saw in the Washington Post today that there was an article that said that productivity levels for employees have dropped precipitously in the first half of 2022. I don't know if you heard in the news also, like yesterday or the day before, that Ford or GM, I think it's GM, one of the auto companies, is offering their least productive employees severance packages if they're willing to just kind of move on. I wondered if you'd seen any of those or what you think might be going on that's causing, because productivity went way up almost immediately during the pandemic. Yeah. People were very productive remotely. And then all of a sudden, first half of 2022, productivity has gone way down. I don't know if you've seen the same thing, or what are your thoughts?
So I haven't seen the Washington Post article, and the severance package thing is the first I've heard of it too. But in terms of productivity dropping, it doesn't surprise me. And reason being is, beginning of the pandemic, I think we were all running on a lot of adrenaline, and we didn't yet know what to do with the new time that we were being provided. And so people were actually working more hours because I mean, what else was there to do? How many sourdough loaves can you make? And I just truly like how
it turns out.
the answer's a lot, but also still like those sit in the oven
There's
for a
still a
while.
limit.
But I think I don't want to use the word mania. Like there was just something that was very pressurized about it. We felt like that was something that felt safe. And that's why people kept holding on to it and doing it so frequently. We have yet to adjust the way that we work. You know, companies have developed hybrid programs and said, okay, we want you in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Monday, Friday is flex depending on what you want. But it's yet to evolve to include what kind of activities make the most sense to do when and where. And Gartner has this really simple and easy graphic that is effectively it's a matrix of working together, working together apart, working together alone, and working alone apart. And so that's a pretty easy way for organizations to just plot out what are those activities? Which activities do we value as doing together physically? Which ones can we get by and be happy with doing together but virtually? And same goes for the working alone together and working alone apart. I think that's the thing that a lot of companies are missing still. And that's what I'm really working to do with Agate is remind these companies and remind these leaders that coming up with the hybrid strategy of where people are geolocated is just, that's like 0.05 step. Yeah. And then you need to get to what work gets done where, and that gets back to the where is time best spent. And there is going to be variation person to person and team to team. I'm in a hotel in Chicago for the Cornet conference, which is a big industry event for the real estate and workplace world. And I was sitting in between two people who I happen to know, but are also going to this conference. And one of whom is a CEO. And he said, I have 3 kids at home. I love going to the office. And, myself and the other seatmate are childless and mostly live alone. So working from home is A-okay for us. So there's always going to be those individual nuances, but having a standard around these are the activities we come to the office or we go to an offsite together to do. These are the things that we catch up with each other on Zoom. These are the things that we can sort of work out on a Google Doc and, work asynchronously together. And then these are just the things that you do on your own because that's your heads down time.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes so much sense. And I think you're right. We do this in everything, right? We overcorrect and we gloss over the subtleties and the nuances of the experience and make big sweeping judgments. It's this or it's that. It's yes or it's no. Yeah. And I think what you're saying is no. You have to be thoughtful. Yeah. If you want your employees to engage in your company, then you better engage in their workplace wellness.
Right. Yeah. And the workplace wellness is not just the box that you provide that you and your organization sign the lease on. It's wherever they have Wi-Fi and wherever they're plugging in their computer or iPad or whatever to get work done, because the work travels with the people. Like your people are your workplace. It doesn't matter where they're sort of, where they're located in the world or where they're traveling to. And I think what you're sort of hitting at too, Arancis, is the meaningful experiences, like the really solid experiences that employees want to sign on for and stay for are the ones that include leaders and just, decision makers that are willing to listen and, not just listen. We hear plenty about like, oh, we hear you. If the companies that figure out how to convert that into meaningful action and actually communicate said actions are the ones that are usually set up for the most amount of success. And those are the ones that typically tend to treat their employees as more than just workers and more than just commodities. And that's something that I think a lot of people have experienced through the past 3 years is just whatever, you're a line on our balance sheet. And that I sort of attribute that to like the severance packages. You're not, and granted, there's a ton of nuance there and all that kind of stuff. But if they're not updating that sort of matrix of where things are getting done and why, they're not setting their people up for success.
Yeah, that was my first question as you shared those articles, Dave, was how are they measuring productivity?
Oh, this is
don't get me started on that.
Yeah, like the U.S. government's metric for productivity for the first half of the year kind of dropped, and the article is fascinating from a standpoint of, I would have assumed that would have happened during year 2 of the pandemic, and we didn't see that. And now all of a sudden we're going into potentially a recession, and people are starting to say, you know what? I'm gonna, what do they call it? Slow quit. What do they call it? Quiet quit.
Quiet quitting.
The quiet quitting. Yeah.
Quiet quit. Yeah. I'm gonna kind of back out a little bit, maybe be a little bit more part-time. And I think a lot of companies are really concerned about that particular piece. At the same time, Stone Mantle has always been a distributed company. We've always done our work virtually, and as a team, we like it. But we don't have policies like vacation time. You get to take whatever time you want. We don't have the same kind of structure that larger organizations have. So I imagine it's very different and difficult for them.
Yeah, and I think it certainly depends on the nature of the work too. I think, as the three of us are in the world of strategy, and we're very adaptable. Our work can travel very easily. Others are not as easy to do that, especially if you're really dependent on like a waterfall kind of setup in terms of really needing to deliberately pass the baton from one team to the next, to the next, to the next. That kind of diligence can make it challenging. And, I still want to, I have a lot of issues with how the world measures productivity in general. But that's a soapbox that would take a long time. So, but it's just, it's not human centered. And at the end of the day, the productivity is only possible when people are set up to be their most successful.
Yes. To me, this whole thing about quiet quitting, and honestly, everything we're talking about, when you talk about that pressurized, maybe obsession on work and productivity that we had during the early days of the pandemic, which felt super imbalanced, right? Like we didn't care about anything except work, because it was like the one thing maybe we could control was saving our companies. And it was definitely pressurized. But I think this malaise that I'm sensing right now, and that I think we're alluding to in lots of different ways, it's just disengagement.
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of exhaustion that has set in, and I think it's attributed to 2022 because that's when a lot of companies did in earnest start implementing their hybrid programs and doing return to office. There were some that happened in 2021, but the majority really were settling in 2022. And again, to go back to the fact that we haven't done that matrix of where work gets done best, people are spread thin in a way that over the past 2 years, we've been solidly in one spot. And so that burn and that exhaustion was put somewhere else. We got to sit down at our kitchen table or the desk that we set up, and that was still where we were getting work done. But the amount of energy that it takes to wake up that early, get ready, pack the food, make sure the kids, if you have them, are settled for the day. Like, it's a whole laundry list of things that wasn't needed for the past 2 years, or you were able to do with a lot more ease over the past 2 years. So we've introduced more stuff without evolving the old stuff to rebalance.
It sounds like you're almost saying that maybe it's the reentry process that led to the lower productivity rather than the hybrid situation that had already been built. Is that what you're kind of saying? That's crazy.
I would
us
say it's a little
having
bit
to
of
go
both. I would
back to
say,
work? A little bit of both? Okay.
yeah, I would say a little bit of both. But they run concurrently with one another. The hybrid stuff is not perfect, and nor should it be. Like, this is a lot of very brand new stuff that's happening. So we can't assume that hybrid or remote first or whatever, structure of workplace strategy your company is going to go with is not going to be perfect on the first or the fifth or even the 10th time. But that burn of reentry also was not accounted for in terms of requiring people to come back to the office. Like, I remember talking about this with a couple of old WeWork teammates before return to office really even was a thing. And we were sort of hedging and saying, people are going to get really tired after like a month, and that's when return to office is going to start to fail, because people are going to remember how tired they used to be. And that body feeling is going to set back in. And it started to be true. Like, following Labor Day, that was the third attempt at return to office, because the other two didn't stick. And, there's like the Einstein saying of like doing the same thing over and over again, it means insanity. Like, there's a little bit of that to it, because it's still square peg, round hole, without adjusting or evaluating what are the things that are breaking and causing the frictions that are, ushering people back home, because it's just less friction.
The other big thing that's coming up for me in all of this is choice, right? So we're using the word requirement a lot, and mandates, and right. And there is an inherent inflexibility in that. But I think what you're really pointing us toward is engagement through choice. And of course, that's where my ear is tuned in, because Dave and I are working on the 2023 Experience Strategy Trend Report. And so we're looking at how customers are really tilting toward an expectation that companies know what they want.
Yeah.
And that they respond to their purpose in the products and services that they provide. That is absolutely as true in the employee experience as it is in the customer experience.
100%. And that's something that always gets overlooked. External customers are always going to be treated with higher regard, because that's where the cash is. And obviously cash is king. We live in a capitalist society. But at the end of the day, employees are also customers. They're an organization's internal customers. They're buying into a different set of currency. And, one does not exist without the other. And that sort of customer experience you start to see in like how hospitality is treated within the company world, and experience programming and events and things like that. But what I continue to push on is experience is more than just those shiny experiences. At the end of the day, it's really, what's the end-to-end journey of being an employee at an organization? Like, from the moment that you sign up, that you see a job and apply for it, all the way to the moment that you hand your badge in, and how many different touch points happen between those two, landmark moments. That's how easy is it to get up from the elevator to your office? Do you know where to go? Do you know where the coffee is? Do you know all these things that are really small, just in the built environment, not let alone how you interact with your manager or how meetings are run. There's so many points for friction that if they were external customers, there would be a whole UX UI team working on this day and night to reduce those frictions and cut down the barriers and make that as seamless and easy and elegant as possible. And so there's so much of that same attention that can be turned inward.
Yeah. We talk a lot about this idea of time well spent. And I wonder, as you think about the hybrid experience for employees, what does time well spent mean for employees? I mean, are there any companies out there that are trying to think about how their employees spend time and what constitutes time well spent? What kind of an environment is needed for time well spent? I would imagine that to some degree what WeWork was all about is making sure that you had these different environments so that you could do the type of work that you needed to do in the right kind of environment. But what are you seeing?
So it's funny. I mean, WeWork certainly set out to do that. I think WeWork had a lot of really good intentions, and I think in the built environment, it completely upended the real estate industry in a way that the industry is still grappling with and trying to figure out what makes sense. It's for the better, but it's still the repercussions not repercussions, the ripple effects are still, becoming evident. The companies that I think that are doing the best job about this actually are the ones that don't have workplaces. The remote first companies, I think, are the ones that are really doing the best with this right now. And it's because they've needed to be the most intentional and the most deliberate about things. So GitHub, which is the remote experience is run by this man, Darren Murph. Dropbox has a really interesting remote first program. All of these organizations are needing to say, these are our core collaboration hours. These are the times that you'll be able to see each other and work with one another. Otherwise, these are hours that you can go for a run, you can do your heads down work, you can cook a meal for your family. So they're really working out what is this balance, one, of how do you do core collaboration hours across several different time zones. I don't know the answer to that, and I would be very interested to see what that data is. But that intention behind saying, no, we don't want you to be in meetings from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's not a good use of your time, whether it's an in-person meeting or a virtual meeting, and being really deliberate about what you're opting into, when, and why. And they're also they're the ones that are really leveraging the idea of offsites in a way that I think is really interesting, because the offsites aren't necessarily about getting work done. They're really about the socialization of work. And there's the research that I'm certain it's from the 70s about strong ties and weak ties. And through the course of the pandemic, your strong ties, so your family, the people that you live with, your closest friends, those relationships got stronger and stronger over the course of the past 3 years. And the person who works in marketing or works in accounting that you'd pop over and see, or you'd bump into in the pantry, you never really needed to work with on a frequent basis. But when you had a question, you had enough equity to say, hey, super quickly, can you answer this for me? Those relationships really got atrophied. And I actually think, outside of the matrix we were talking about earlier, the atrophy of those relationships also contributes to the drop in productivity, because people, one, there's been so much turnover. So those relationships that might have been there in 2020 are gone because those people aren't there anymore. And then there weren't enough deliberate relationship building moments between, then and now to say this is still established. It's not going to be hard for us to get those questions from a team we don't collaborate with on a frequent basis. So I think companies are continuing, and I feel like I've been saying this for about a year, I think, and I'm not the only one, but socializing and just spending time with someone or with a team is, I think, more crucial than a lot of organizations are really giving it credence for, which is a little unfortunate, because even though the dotted line to, justify it might still be a little wobbly, it's still the foundation of how productivity happens, because you can do things quickly if there are people that are connectors. And if you don't have those connectors that, are like the axles in a wheel that say, I know people in this group and that group and the one over in San Francisco and in Austin, then you need to go and do the homework and do the research. So you lose time. And that's really where I think a lot of teams are struggling right now, is that they're really tight with one another, but it's insular. So all those silos that we've been talking about for decades of like, oh, we need to break them down and we need to be cross collaborative. they got stronger through the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So interesting. And I know something you've explored in the past and that our mutual friend, Lakshmi Venkarajan, has explored is this idea of sort of corporate matchmaking a little bit, where we look at the skills and talents and resources that surround us, and we have enough sense of understanding and intimacy around the whole person that we're able to make quicker and stronger connections. And I guess I hadn't really considered the downstream effects of losing that. I've thought a lot about the fact that junior employees now don't meet senior employees unless they're in their direct team. So the lack of mentoring now, and certainly that's going to have long effects as well. But
it's going to have a lot of knock-on effects, and that's, that is actually something that the very pro in-office community really leans on, is like, oh, well, we lose the water cooler experience, or we lose the mentorship. Mm-hmm. Not completely untrue, but they're also red herrings, because those were things that a company never accounted for, or never accounted for in really effective ways.
Wasn't designing for, certainly.
Not at all. Even with mentorship, like you got lucky. You got lucky if you were with the right kind of manager at the right kind of moment. And it also just unfortunately depended on who you are, what you looked like, what school you went to, and all those kinds of things, unfortunately, still mattered. And so how might an organization design a mentorship program that actually is, as equitable as possible, and actually, get their arms around it, rather than just saying like, oh, mentorship happens because people get to shadow and be apprentices and things like that. That to me is leaving a little too much up to chance, and a little too much up to human error.
So
I love that.
This is all I'm thinking about. What's that, Dave?
I was thinking about one of the things that we do in the collaborative. It's kind of a cultural thing that we do, the walkabout. Mm-hmm. Which is where we, two people, one, they could be in person, they could be remote, or one person could be in person and one person can be remote. And we just tell them to go on a walk together. And if they're not physically next to each other, then we have them call each other on the phone and walk as they talk. And people love it. Simple little thing.
It sounds lovely. But again, like, it's so simple.
Yeah.
It's so simple. That's the thing. Like, Francis, you said it earlier. We tend to over-engineer stuff. Mm-hmm. It doesn't need to be complicated. You can start small, see how it works. And, that's iterative design at its core. It's a speculative thing. Let's see if it sticks. And even if it doesn't stick, you still will find learnings from it. And, something as novel as a phone call. I can't remember the last phone call meeting I took. My goodness.
I'm a big fan of walking meetings. They open up completely different creative pathways.
Entirely. I used to love doing those at WeWork, partly because the office was so loud. And it was so nice to just take a walk around Chelsea, or, if it was a longer meeting, go over to the High Line on the west side. But yeah, doing it I have not had one of those since the pandemic started, and, converted into that hybrid experience.
All right. Well, we'll do one soon.
We'll do one.
I mean, I could go on and on about it, but it really does create a whole different experience of collaboration. We underestimate vastly, I think, the amount of digital distraction that happens in meetings. Because we're on camera right now, I am pretty focused. I have everything on sleep mode. And yet, if we weren't, there's a good chance something else is going to break in on that, just by the nature 100%. Of the multitasking that we do. There's going to be a Slack notification.
100%. And even with the three of us, psychologically, we're all looking at ourselves. We're checking out what we look like on camera, which is, and when you take the video out, you're just focusing on the voice. The human brain is really interesting. And so it's fascinating to think of how we can just implement really, really slight changes to these behaviors and get radically different outcomes.
Agree.
And that's really just what we need to be starting to do. Yeah.
All right. So I could talk about this all day, and yet I should probably start to wrap us up. So I'm going to ask you to think for a second about what you believe the most important takeaways are from this conversation. What do you hope people will leave knowing?
I hope that people will leave after listening to this knowing that just because your organization or you have set up a hybrid strategy doesn't mean that you've set up an activity strategy. So like, what activities happen where and why, and how do you measure the success of them? I think that that's a really crucial next step that needs to happen in this evolution. And that's how we start to not necessarily debunk the productivity drop messages that are out there, because it's just inevitably true. But it's a way that we can make our way around it without just saying, screw it, we're going back to 2019.
Yeah. Resisting the urge to overcorrect.
Yeah.
What I love about this,
resisting going back to what we know.
Yeah. What I love about this conversation is not once did personality profiling come up as the secret.
Or generation.
Yeah, right. As the secret to creating better teams, right? So no Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
And I think that there's so much more that can be done for employee experience and for employee productivity that has nothing to do with some of the tried and true methodologies that we've been using for team building for so long. So I love that.
It's not to say that those things don't have a role, but we have so much more like bottom bricks of the foundation stuff that needs tackling first. And that's the thing that always makes me wary of. There's a difference between, Gen Z design and millennial design and Gen X design and, boomer design. At the end of the day, we are all individuals. The information that informs how we are obviously is very different, but let's solve for the basic needs first. Let's solve for that bottom of the pyramid, and then we can start talking about how we self-actualize based on what generation we grew up in, or whether we're an introvert or an extrovert.
So well said. Corinne, thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to see the impact you have with Agate. For folks who want to learn more about you and what you do, where should they look?
You can find my website at agate.studio. And I am most frequently on LinkedIn or Twitter. My Twitter handle is _Corinne Murray _, and LinkedIn is, you can just find me by my name.
We'll get those links into the show notes, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another great episode. Thank you to all of you listening. Thank you for continuing to support our efforts to make experience strategy for both customers and employees, who are one and the same in truth, better for everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Experience Strategy Podcast. If you're having fun nerding out with us, please follow and share wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Find more episodes and continue the conversation with us at experiencestrategypodcast.com.